Sketch the graphs of y equals sine of x and y equals cosine of x for x greater or equal to negative pi and smaller or equal to 2 pi. So, and then we have some questions we want to answer here. Now, we are going to graph this using our graphing calculator. So, before we start, we want to make sure that we're using the calculator in radian mode. So if you reset your calculator, which is what I just did here, it will revert to radian mode. But if it's set to degrees, you would have to change it to radian. So let's start by graphing sine of x. Now if I graph this, here's my sine function. It's sort of flat. And what we want to do here is we want to adjust our window settings. The x-axis should be going from negative pi up to 2 pi. That's our domain here. And our range, our y-axis, should be going from negative 1 up to positive 1. So we're going to adjust our window settings. X-min, so that should be negative pi. Our x-max should be 2 pi. Our y-min should be negative 1, and our y-max should be 1. And if we graph it, there's our sine function. And what we want to notice here is that when x equals to 0, sine of 0 is 0. When x equals 2 pi over here, sine of 2 pi is also 0. At the midpoint here, we have pi, so sine of pi is also 0. This midpoint here between 0 and pi is going to be pi over 2, or 90 degrees. Sine of pi over 2 is 1, positive 1. Okay, so these are some of the things that we can notice. Let's now add cosine. We graph it. There's our sine, here comes our cosine. And we can now see that when we have sine of 0 equals 0, cosine of 0 equals positive 1. And cosine of pi, which is here, is negative 1. So now we can answer some of these questions. So I'm actually not going to sketch this. I'm going to just take a screenshot of it. So there it is. We can now annotate our graph here. So this line here, that is our sine of x, and this other graph, that line here is our cosine of x. So for the first question, the value of cosine of x when sine of x has a maximum value. Well, sine of x has a maximum value right there. Okay. And so this here is a midpoint between, this is x equals 0, this is x equals pi, this is x equals 2 pi, and down here will be negative pi. Okay. So the midpoint right here, which is going to correspond to pi over 2, or 90 degrees. So when sine of x has a maximum value, cosine of x equals to 0. So we can say here that cosine of x equals, and we can get rid of the calculator now. Cosine of x equals to 0 at sine of x maximum. In question 2, the value of cosine of x when sine of x has a minimum value. Well, sine of x has a minimum right there and right there. Okay? So the well, we can see first of all that at the minimum cosine of x is going to be 0. It's an x-intercept. The coordinate, the x-coordinate here is going to be 3 pi over 2. And over here it's going to be negative pi over 2. So cosine of x equals to 0 at sine of x minimum. And then finally, the value of cosine of x when sine of x has a value of 0. So sine of x has a value of 0 right there at the origin, right here, and right here. And these three, actually this one here as well. Okay. And what we want to notice is that over here, when we have x-intercept, so sine of x has a value of 0 right there, cosine of x is negative 1. At the next x-intercept of sine, cosine of, in this case, 0 here, is positive 1. And then it's negative 1. And then it's positive 1. So we can say that we can say that it alternates between negative 1 and positive 1. So that will be fairly vague, but sort of that's what it does. We can be more specific. So we can say that sine x equals to 0 at x equals negative pi, x equals 0, x equals pi, and x equals 2 pi. Okay, so that's going to be the x-intercepts, and then cosine at that point, so cosine at negative pi equals negative 1. The cosine at 0 equals positive 1. The cosine at pi equals negative 1. And then finally, the cosine at 2 pi equals positive 1.